I think I would define it as I'm passionate about technology. So startups that are working on cutting edge technology and also making customers happy. So.
Michal Blumental, thank you so much for being on my show. How are you?
I'm great. How are you, Michael? Thank you so much for having me on your wonderful show.
I am fantastic, but you actually go by Michael in the US, right? Not Michal.
Very true. Michal in Israel, Michael in the US. When I just moved here, everyone thought I would go by Michelle. I just didn't feel like a Michelle. And Michael is a good conversation starter, and it's memorable, which is always good for business.
I love it. I love it. Memorable, always good for business. Okay, so we have to start with this fun fact, which we've already shared with our audience. But folk dancing, hora, most people who are watching this are not going to know what hora is, even if they're from Israel. So we have to spend a few minutes talking about folk dancing. What is this, and why have you been doing this for 14 years?
That's a good question. So
Professionally.
professionally, everyone thinks of Israeli folk dancing as just a big group of people dancing in a circle, right? So
Yeah.
that's not what it is. It's actually it's very professional thing to do. The company performed all over the world. So when I was 15, we went to Brazil for a whole month, and we performed in let's see, Paris, Berlin, Russia even. So it's a great thing to do. It really built my character, I have to say.
So give me a little bit of context into what it actually is, tangibly.
So it's basically any type of dancing if it's played to an Israeli song, and that's pretty much what it is. It started when the first settlers came into Israel. They built the new Jewish country, and they took some of the traditional dancing that they brought from their own country, like it used to be Russia and Poland, and they implemented it into a new type of Israeli folk dancing. And it's really evolved over the years. There's lots of different groups in Israel right now, and it's no longer constrained to just the traditional dancing. It's now very modern dancing, and that's why I'm saying it's pretty much anything that is played over an Israeli song in the background.
So when you're saying professionally, like what does that actually mean to do this professionally?
It means that you have a choreographer, right, that builds the dance, and you have a group of people that train a lot. We train about twice or three times a week for
Wow.
2 hours every time. We do ballet training and modern training, and it's mainly in groups of two. So a man and a woman dancing together to the same choreography.
So that is
And
definitely
costumes, the whole shebang.
the whole shebang. This is definitely something different than what I imagined. I'm thinking back to 60s and 70s videos of people dancing together in large circles. But I definitely have to go check this out. And this is actually a pretty nice segue to something that we chatted about earlier, which is this whole notion of the integration of performing arts with business and with technology. And you're running a startup, Hyro AI, and we'll get to talk about the NLP side of things. But first, I want to talk about this whole notion of performing arts with business and startups.
Absolutely. I think that performing takes a big role in what I do professionally. I think I associated the performance with the professionalism in the Israeli army. That was the first time it occurred to me. So I was very fortunate to be in A200, like many Israelis in the tech world. It's the intelligence corp technological unit. And I was working on a project, a cybersecurity project, it was very successful. I don't know how to say it in English, but in Hebrew we say we scored it. How do you translate it to English? I
I
no
think
idea,
I think
right?
we're gonna have to keep it with scored it.
Okay, great. So we started, and then all the leaders of the Israeli army and defense, came in. We had to present the project to them, and that's the first time where I was standing in front of the chief of staff, the Israeli army chief of staff, and I felt like I'm taking everything I learned from performing and dancing to this world, and it's really about engaging your audience and making them pretty much adore you and relate to what you're saying and what you're doing, and making sure your messaging is accurate. And I think it relates perfectly to that world. And then later on, it's in conferences, being presenting at the booth. It's even in company meetings. Sales demos, obviously, it's in everything you do, and you can see that this is the stage I have right now for my Zoom meetings.
I have to say that I cannot resonate more. And we've recorded almost 200 episodes of this show, and I'm so happy that we're talking about this. This is something that I've been reflecting lately. But actually, by the time this comes out, hopefully, a book that I've been writing will come out, and a significant part of it will have been about my experience. With my father taking me on stage for a tech conference at 13 years old, not knowing anything, but learning slowly the importance of being able to deliver messages in a coherent and concise way that's also engaging, and then reflecting on how important it is when you're leading teams. And I'm sure that not only in public speaking, but also when you're leading your team with a startup, and the way you're communicating and engaging your employees and the people that are running this adventure with you, it's just as crucial. Give me some insight into what the specific things that you've learned over the years about expressing your opinions and delivering messages in not an entertaining way, but an engaging way that makes people want to listen to you and like you said, adore you.
I think the secret is in preparing. I always say that my superpower is that I'm always prepared. I have to say I was a bit nervous about this one because
So,
there is no way to prepare.
so I'm sorry because I didn't prepare you at all. This is meant to be spontaneous, but I already adore you, and I'm very, very engaged. So you're doing a good job with the performing arts already.
Stop it. No, I'm kidding. So I think preparing is key here, and making sure you know exactly what you want to say, how you want to say it. Storytelling is also very key in performance, and that you know who you're talking to in advance. I always like to prepare, like where the person is from, what he cares about. A good tip for sales is to check their LinkedIn account and see what they posted about. So what do they care about? What are they passionate about? And building a genuine conversation around that.
Right. So I love people say that when you go on stage, you want to start with a joke, right? That always loosens the audience. But it sounds like what you're saying when you're in sales or when you're talking to somebody in business, knowing something that they're curious about and bringing that up is just as important as jokes. So I'd love to talk a little bit about now Hyro and what you're doing there, and I'll bring back performing arts to this conversation just because I'm so excited to talk about it finally. But talk to me a little bit about the startup that you're running now.
Absolutely. So I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Hyro. We're an innovative startup. We're backed by top VCs here in the Bay Area. I'm from Oakland, by the way, in New York and in Tel Aviv. So all around, and we're doing the next generation of virtual assistants. So chatbots for websites, voice assistants for call centers, and we have this cutting edge approach for natural language processing, or how are we able to understand what the user is saying or asking.
So, virtual assistants, bots, conversational AI, paint me the ecosystem. It's getting to be pretty popular. Almost any website that I go on that is trying to sell me something, it does so very successfully because I love engaging with the virtual bots. And the famous Turing test of do you know either you're speaking to a machine or a person? It's becoming more and more relevant. Talk to me about this
Mm-hmm.
ecosystem, and then I'd love to talk more about actually the company.
Okay, absolutely. So conversational AI is the set of technologies that enables humans to interact with technology, right? So think Alexa, Google Home, Siri, all those great stuff, and that includes chatbots. So if we focus on chatbots, if you think about the chatbot experiences that you had, it has two main categories. So you have the dumb bots. Those are the bots that everything is pre-configured there. So it's all buttons and if and else, and you have to think in advance of all the possible questions users can ask and provide all the possible answers in advance. That's the world of dumb chatbots. That's the most common ones. Then, if you do have an open text field, which means that you allow users to say whatever they want, pretty much, it means that you have natural language processing and understanding, right? You have to be able to break down the sentence, understand what the user is asking about, and that's where natural language processing kicks in. And then for that world, we have the traditional approach. It's funny to call it traditional because it's a relatively new field anyway, but that's what most solutions use. They're all built on intents. So, for example, when you say, Alexa, what's the weather like today? That's a weather query intent, right? And a similar intent would be asking how hot is it going to be today, or what's the temperature like going to be today, and should I wear a sweater today? It's all the same intent, right? So in order for the AI to identify or recognize that intent, you have to provide something that's called training data, right? So you have to provide all the similar phrasing that I just mentioned in order for the AI to understand this intent and recognize it. And it's a very long process. It takes a lot of manual work. It's called tagging similar conversations. It's very expensive and it's limited to the intents that you already supported, right?
Right.
Not very scalable. So what we do at Hyro, we have this whole new approach for conversational AI, which I'm super excited about. Instead of moduling intents, we module the language itself. So we use computational linguistics, and we learn all the different language rules, like how to identify the verb in a sentence or how to identify the nouns in the sentence, which means that we understand in real time what the user is asking. And so we're able to get a very high quality of conversation super fast,
It sounds
and not
to me
being
like what
limited.
you're doing. What you're doing is literally, it's also almost like third and fourth grade grammar classes. To when kids have to learn, they're not just learning the intent; they're learning about how are sentences formed. Because when you read a sentence, only by knowing the formation of the sentence, sometimes you can really understand what the person means. Sometimes when you just add a comma somewhere, you're changing the whole intent of the sentence. The famous example is obviously from Hamilton, I believe, with Angelica, where she there's a whole song about how there's a misplaced comma, and it changes the whole meaning of the sentence, right?
Yes, and Peggy, don't forget Peggy.
Peg, the most important, of course. Uh, I also want to talk about scalable processes, and one thing that you mentioned earlier is this idea of running scalable processes and Scrum Master, Agile. So you're the chief operating officer. First of all, give me a 2 sentence brief. What is the chief operating officer in your eyes?
So it varies tremendously from between different organizations. For us specifically, I'm overseeing all the commercial aspects of the company, so sales, business development, partnerships, all of those, product market fit, and so on. It can mean different things for different organizations. Sometimes it means managing legal and HR and things like that. That's what I'm doing for Hyro. What was the second question?
Well, specifically, being a Scrum Master and running Agile and Jira, you've done this in several organizations. It's something it sounds like you're at least a little bit passionate about, and I'd love to learn a little bit more about running scalable processes.
I'm super passionate about building scalable processes. I'm a Jira geek, I would say. I have actually been called the Jira queen in every organization I went to because,
Wow.
because I like to roll up my sleeves and actually configure Jira. Go figure. But I even wrote a paper for the university about agile development lifecycle. And I'll tell you why. I think that once you sit down to configure a workflow, it really enforces you to think about the process and enforce different steps in the process. For example, when you have to define all the statuses you have in the workflow, so now it makes you think. Does every task need to go through testing, for example? If you decide yes, then you build a status called testing, and that's it. From now until forever, every task will have to go through testing. And that's an amazing way to enforce processes across the organization in a very scalable way with very little effort.
Right. Right. A selfish question, because I've been in this heated debate for many years since my time in the 8200 unit. Task story points. For whoever doesn't
Oh,
know, attach. Oh, I see that we're gonna enter a debate here. The notion is, for anybody who doesn't understand Jira or Scrum in general, the idea here is that you're assigning tasks, and while in day to day we ask each other how long is a task going to take you, Jira you assign. Story points to a task based on complexity. Now, some choose to continue working through time, others choose to work through complexity. They have their pros and cons, but Michal, I'd love for you to explain to me a little bit about the pros and cons of each, because in every organization that I've been a part of, I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly of both approaches, and it just seems like there still is no convergence on one perfect approach.
that's an amazing question. And I personally have a love-hate relationship with story points because on the one hand, it's psychologically for people, it's much easier to give story points instead of saying it's going to take me 4 hours. So usually you define what is a story point, right? For the people who's not familiar with this, you just say what's the time unit that each story point is equal to. So when you're giving story point, when you're giving your estimation in story points, you're really giving your time estimation. But people are having it, they're having a much easier time saying it in story points instead of hours. So I do like that aspect of making it easier for people to adopt this approach, because one of the most difficult things of moving into an agile development lifecycle is the adoption. So engineers tend to hate it. So this is one thing that can make it easier. And I do have to say, so that I personally don't like it, because why not just say how much time it's going to take you? But because I'm very practical. But I do like it because Jira has a built-in tool to measure velocity through it. So if you do use story points, you can very easily measure how many tasks you can do in a sprint. Sprint is a interval of a week or two or three that the team is working in. If you're doing Scrum, we can go into Kanban also if you want, but I don't know how deep you want to go into the world of Agile. So love-hate relationship, but definitely I recommend estimations and choosing one path and going with it.
Wonderful. So consistency, that then that's the main key, right? So there's pros and cons of each, but consistency is the key. And so when you're entering these organizations, what tangibly do you do with Jira? Why are you considered the Jira queen of these organizations?
Because I enforce the entire organization to move to Jira, and then when they don't do it, I do it myself, and I configure it myself. So on the first company I've been with after the army, they're called MCE, Mobile Care Experts. They're selling into the telecom space. So we got to a place where we were 70 people in the R&D already, 70 developers. And we were managing everything. Every team was managing their tasks differently, and we implemented the waterfall. Waterfall is a very old methodology where, like a waterfall, you have different steps in the process. So you for example, you have design and then design review, and then development, and then testing, and then another review. And it's usually a very long process. It's a very good way to manage things at scale, because it's very determined.
Right.
But it means that you have a very long development life cycle, because if you have all these steps in the process takes a long time. So it's usually like a release cycle of even 6 months to release a new version. So we took a 70 people R&D, and we moved them from waterfall to Scrum, to 2 week sprints. We started with 2 weeks, and we ended up after 6 months moving to 1 week sprints, which is amazing in my eyes.
Really?
And I did it back then as I was the VP of project management. So it was part of my role to do that. Internal processes as well as external customer facing processes. That was my main responsibility. So we did it very organized. We took an external company that helped us educate people on what is Scrum and how does a sprint work and all the key terms, which taught me a lot. And then I was able to do the same for the other two companies I've been with.
Wonderful, wonderful. That's incredible. The difference, at what point of a startup's life cycle is it really relevant? Do you think to start adopting this methodology, and not just agile? Because obviously, I think the earlier the startup, the more crucial it is to be agile and be open to pivoting and for quick feedback. But in terms of the tangibly of operating it through a software like Jira or any other, is it from day one? Is it from employee number 30? Is there some rule of thumb that you're starting to understand as you're going through these different organizations?
Absolutely. As soon as something falls between the cracks,
Ah,
as soon as what you currently have in place is not good enough, and if tasks are not being done on time, or someone has to keep following up with everyone to make sure they're being done, then that's when you need to scale it.
that's when you need to scale it. Okay, so Michal, 20 minutes are almost over, but I want to go back a little bit to performing arts, and just as a segue into who you are and what you're passionate about. You've taken on a variety of roles. You were talking about performing arts, to Scrum methodology, to processes, to conversational AI. What are you really passionate about? How do you choose what you spend your valuable hours of the day doing?
I think I would define it as I'm passionate about technology. So startups that are working on cutting edge technology, and also making customers happy. So if it's a technology that involves a lot of work closely with customers, I like to work with big organizations, so enterprises, and build those genuine relationships that are for the long term, not just like a very short project. So continuous work, and showing value over time, and that's what I'm really passionate about, and scaling internal processes.
I love it. Okay, and before we leave, I need 3 words that you would choose to describe yourself, or that your co-founders would choose to describe you.
Okay, great. So I watched a bunch of your episodes, so I was ready with this question. I have to say that the exercise of deciding on 3 words is awesome, and I recommend it to everyone. So the first word is problematic because it's in Hebrew, because I couldn't find a good parallel in English. So I'll explain what it means. It's a bulldozer. Okay. That's what it means that's what it is in Hebrew. In English, it means the literal meaning is a truck that breaks stones, and it's a word that's commonly used to describe people who make things happen.
Yes.
So that's my first word, and then the second and third is obsessive and passionate.
Bulldozer, obsessive, and passionate. I have to say that bulldozer might be my favorite word out of almost 200 episodes. I guess that's 600 words. It's just wonderful, Michal. This was wonderful. This was insightful. Thank you for the time. I know how busy you are, and Mazal Tov on your birthday, which was just
Thank you.
recently, right?
And Mazal Tov on your book.
Thank you, thank you. Hopefully, by the time this airs, it'll be out. We're doing the final touches. At least now we know how hard it is. But this was just a wonderful conversation. So, toda rabba.
Thank you. This was super fun.